My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Rueben Lange. It's June 4th, 2025. We're at Dave Ward's Vineyard in Canby. Rueben, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
First question to get things started. Why wine?
I was thinking a lot about this on the drive over and also the last couple of days. And it's an amalgam of a lot of different things, I think. You know, on some level, actually, like somewhat jokingly and genuinely, the first thing that came to mind was, you know, I grew up when Harry Potter was like first hitting the shelves. And I can't help but think there was some of me that was like, okay, I know rationally that magic isn't real, but like, what's the closest I can get to it? My grandfather was a chemist, a really brilliant chemist. So I was always rooted in the sciences, but I'd go to his lab with him and see these science experiments that felt like magic. And I think fermentation science kind of captures a bit of that. How is it that you can take one thing, ferment it, and then, you know, have something that could taste like hundreds, if not thousands of different things. So I think there is this element of magic to it that's still, I don't know, it's the closest I can get to that, like, childhood surrealism that I'm constantly trying to recapture. So that's, you know, one part of it. But honestly, and somewhat hedonistically, it feels good. Like, wine just feels good when you drink it. It's cool, you know, it captures all of your senses, and I think if you care to have it do so, it's kind of like an all-consuming thing. It makes you think, it makes you feel, it makes you smell, it makes you touch, not necessarily with your hands, but with your palate. And I think, you know, there are few things I can think of that I really derive a lot of pleasure from, that really kind of, you know, take the whole body and put it into play. So I think that's a huge part of it. But, you know, my roots are in music. That was kind of one of my first loves. I went to music school in Portland, actually, at Lewis and Clark, and I have not picked up my clarinet since my senior recital. I'm a classically trained clarinetist. Partly because I just got so burnt out, you know, and it became just a form of adjudication. But all that being said, I think there was something about music and the abstract quality of it that always really pulled me in, and I think that's a lot of, in certain ways at least, a lot of the same fulfillment that I derive from wine. There is nothing concrete about it. It is very open to interpretation, and it is yours to experience and engage with in whatever way you deem appropriate. I'm, you know, very much a contrarian. I'm, you know, very excited by philosophical thought and debate, and that is kind of intrinsic to wine. As much as a lot of people, a lot of tastemakers, somms, so on and so forth, want to beat you over the head and tell you that there's one way to think, one way to taste, and one way to talk about it, that is just definitively not true. So I like the open-endedness of wine. It can be what you want it to be. And then also, you know, from a very early age, I was very fortunate to grow up in a family that, first and foremost, the thing that we care about and talk about is food. The second we wake up, it's what are we going to be eating? We finish eating, and then it's what are we going to be eating next? Sometimes while we're eating a meal, we're already talking about what we're going to be eating next. Partly just because I grew up in a Jewish family, and, you know, Jews and food go hand in hand together like peanut butter and jelly, or, you know, guilt trips and guilt trips. And I think, you know, because of that, food and sitting around a table and engaging with people in that sort of, you know, communal setting has always been very important to me. It's my happy place. It's where I kind of find my center. Sometimes I'm not even at the table. I'll cook a meal for people, get up and leave, and let them just have a good time while I go, you know, take a nap. And I think, you know, wine is inherently about bringing people together. It's something that's meant to be shared and enjoyed and talked about. And I think I was immediately, from my earliest memories of drinking wine, drawn to that quality of it, of how maybe you sit down and have a glass of wine and it's not even a part of the conversation. Maybe you sit down and open a bottle and it is, but inevitably it moves past that quite quickly, and it's really just about trying to engage with one another in a meaningful and empathetic way. That's just cool. We need more of that in an age that's, so keen on, making knee-jerk conclusions and or drawing knee-jerk conclusions and not really caring what someone else has to say. Not that that's obviously where it started for me. We've certainly devolved since my early days of wine as a people. But I think especially right now, if I'm to jump ahead and think about why I still am in wine, I think that's a really big part of it for me. Yeah. Kind of like I said, food and wine always being a big thing. Like, my family, we were always very comfortable, but certainly didn't have a ton of money. But the ways that we would always go out and celebrate, or the fun or special thing that we would do together was going out to eat. It was always like the new cool restaurant that's doing something compelling, or maybe just a tried and true restaurant that was just doing something perfect as perfect can be. And I think those early memories of going out to eat, there was always a wine component. My family very proudly say they are not wine snobs. It's one way in which we really butt heads. They obviously think I am. But wine was just always kind of there. So, I unfortunately didn't grow up in a Francophile family where it was okay for 5-year-olds to try wine. But, once I think I hit adulthood in Judaism, so 13, it was acceptable for me to have a little taste. And again, to kind of go back to my first comment of that quality of magic, I think there was something that I could just never comprehend about wine. Which is counter to most of my being, because I'm someone who really needs answers. I need to know how it works. I, unfortunately, at times operate a tiny bit too much in terms of definitive truths. And I think there was something that I found really compelling about wine, in that it didn't seem like there was really just one answer. Why does the Pinot taste like, red fruit one day and purple fruit the next? Is it temperature? Is it my microbiome? Is it, the food I'm eating it with? And I think that quality of wine in particular, when I first really started to get my head around that, a steak is always going to kind of taste like a steak within a reasonable spread of things. Wine, it's who fucking knows? Yeah.
Let's talk about life before wine a little bit. Tell us about where you were born and raised, and about, you obviously talked a little bit about your upbringing already, but kind of about your upbringing.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Great place. That's actually kind of what brought me out to Portland. I feel like there's a very similar culture, vibe, energy. Minneapolis is way better in that it's honest working class versus where I can't help but feel like Portland's a tiny bit of a show of that at times. But yeah, so grew up in Minneapolis in a very atypical family. I have 3 moms. I had 2 moms who were together, they split, and one got remarried, so I was kind of the cool kid on the block. I remember in kindergarten, one kid, this was of course a story that was told to me, I don't perfectly remember this, but I told one of my friends in school that I had 3 moms, and at the end of the day, he ran up to his mom crying and screaming, "This isn't fair, I only get 1." But yeah, so very kind of atypical family structure, and a really beautiful community of people that I grew up in. I kind of joke that I didn't just have 3 moms, I was raised by an angry pack of lesbians. That was very much my family's community, especially in those early days of being out. It was still pretty scary and not exactly a culture hospitable to LGBTQIA plus people. Grew up in this really beautiful, supportive community of people. that very much were about encouraging people to like really explore their own path, and as much as I kind of hate this term, like live their truth. But I think that was a really formative part of me feeling comfortable to just explore whatever the hell it was I felt like I wanted to explore. There was always a lot of support growing up with that. So, you know, because of that, I think I said my first love was music. My first love was actually food, again, largely because of my family. You know, and there's stories of me being like 3 and standing at the kitchen counter, completely naked and just an apron. I was a nudist from a very young age, just like screaming, "More ingredients, please," as I'm, you know, like whipping up these concoctions that are absolutely not fit for human consumption. But it was, you know, it was always like, I was always drawn into this, you know, working with my hands and especially if it was food focused. So, you know, then fast forward a few years and I start getting into music thanks to this really brilliant jazz musician, Donald Washington. He was my first ever music teacher when I was, Jesus, was that I think it would have been 3rd grade, maybe. And he was kind of the person who really opened up the doors for me in terms of what it is to engage with some sort of creative process. So even though it's not, you know, concretely wine related, I think I really have to kind of tip my hat to him and credit him with being the person who led me down this whole path of things that are, you know, either directly art or kind of tangentially related. Fast forward another few years and I really started taking food a tiny bit more seriously. When I was 13, my whole family took a trip to Paris. And I remember throwing a temper tantrum when my parents and, you know, like my aunts and uncles all got to go out to the fancy Parisian restaurant and I had to stay at home and babysit my cousins. But being there, I couldn't point it to a specific, you know, food or meal or experience. But I think that's really when something kind of turned for me and I really realized that food was what I wanted to dedicate my life to. So shortly after getting back, and this is where the, you know, community support element really comes in strong, I decided that I needed to start cooking, and like that was going to be my thing. So I would, you know, in my mind, I was getting all of these like dinner guests to come over because they were excited about eating my cooking. Really, they were probably just doing my parents a favor, but, you know, I would curate these big meals and, you know, have these elaborate table settings to feed people, you know. And when I turned 16, I started a catering company, which I was actually getting paid for because people liked my food, not just because they thought I was cute or, you know, they were longtime friends with my parents. And really started taking food a lot more seriously, you know, and I feel like that was kind of right at the time when the Food Network started becoming a thing. Celebrity chefs became a thing, and really dove kind of head first into that whole world. And I remember, you know, when it came time to start looking at colleges, I was very adamant that, you know, culinary school, that's what I'm going to do. And thank fucking God my parents said no, because what a waste of money. Again, sorry to anyone who went to culinary school and really loved it. But, you know, they like kind of begrudgingly supported this whole idea of me cooking. And we landed on the compromise was going to be, we will support you in this cooking endeavor if you go and just get a liberal arts degree. So the trade-off was that I went to Lewis and Clark so I could be in a city that had a really phenomenal food scene and hopefully, you know, dip my toe into the waters. And, you know, had some really great support as well in that one of my cousins on my stepmother's side is a chef in Chicago. So when I decided that I really wanted to cook and give it a serious go, he was phenomenal. I took a gap year in between high school and college, and that happened to line up perfectly with him opening a restaurant in Chicago with one of his mentors. So I went out there for the summer, and that was my first like real restaurant experience. I had worked some in Minneapolis, but it was really more like long-term stages where they're they're not really throwing you into the fire. This was like, I was in the deep end, and, it was, torrential waters, and you were expected to do like the butterfly perfectly. It was pretty rough. But just loved it immediately. The chaos, the debauchery, the intensity of it. And, luckily did well enough where my cousin's mentor, this really, and a friend of mine, Todd Stein, kind of took me under his wing. I actually ended up going after college, moving to Chicago for a period of time to help him open another restaurant. But maybe we'll get to that later. But so when I decided to move to Portland, they kind of helped me line up some work. And I ended up having a very long-term stage at Le Pigeon, which was phenomenal. Gabe Ruckers, really good people. I feel like people ask me all the time, like, what was it like to work there? Surely he's one of those like egomaniacal people. And I remember once I was at work, I did something that he didn't quite like. I think it was like brune wine shallots. That's kind of the memory I had in my head, and was doing a horrible job of it. And he kind of looked over at me and he was like, that's not really how we do it here, bud. And like in that tone of voice, totally reasonable. And he came up to me after the shift, I'll never forget this, and was like, hey man, I'm so sorry I chewed you out. I was like, oh. In my head, I'm like, I was working in Chicago where people were throwing like red hot saute pans at my head. So yeah, dude, you're cool. But so I had just like such a positive experience cooking here, that it kind of confirmed for me this desire to like be in food. So I, like reluctantly made it through college, much to my parents' surprise, like did well and graduated, and then again kind of dove headfirst into cooking. So moved to Chicago for a period of time, and made it to one of the like be-all, end-all restaurants. Like you go work at this place for even just a year and you can essentially write your ticket anywhere. And I think I was there for about a month and hated every single moment of it. I had never felt just so taken advantage of, and like I was just, I would happily be replaced tomorrow. They didn't give a shit about me. And I think, we were also all on shift pay. And I was like working 20-hour days, just like some nights sleeping in my car because I didn't want to waste the time driving home. It's the only time I've ever essentially walked out on a job. I got to the end of the shift. It was also a funny day where Thomas Keller came in to eat, the famous chef from the French Laundry. And he was so gracious. He went around to every single cook in the kitchen, shook every person's hand and thanked them for the meal. And there was something about that. And then immediately being screamed at 30 seconds later by the chef, where I was like, I'm done. I never need to do this again. And quit. Kind of moved back to Minnesota to lick my wounds for a while and reassess and figure out what the fuck I could possibly do next, given that, from as early as I could remember, food was what I wanted to do. During that period of like taking a break from food, worked as a bike messenger for a few years, and year-round Minnesota winters, which was a humbling experience to say the least. I still kind of can't feel my left toe from those years of minor frostbite. Got recruited to help kind of save a sinking ship that was this little restaurant group. And was, primarily focused on this one restaurant at the Art Institute there. And while I was there, ended up having to take over the wine program and kind of be like the wine buyer, for lack of a better term. And that's when I really kind of seriously started getting into wine and like thinking about it more critically, studying it, learning about, producers, regions, soil types, why they're different, why they matter, so on and so forth. And it was during that time that my first mentor in wine, this really brilliant somm and wine educator and wine importer, Jill Mott, she was based in Minneapolis, was in Mallorca for a while. Now she's running the wine program for the Carlisle in New York, or Rosewood at the Carlisle, I think it's called. But she was the first person to like really give me the time of day and talk to me about wine and educate me. And when that restaurant group went under, no matter how hard I tried, it was, just writing was on the walls. And once again was trying to figure out what the hell I would do next. She was the one to be like, you like wine quite a bit. Maybe you should just, go work a harvest. See how you feel about it. So actually came out to Portland, worked my first harvest at Division Winemaking Company with Tom and Kate.
What year was that?
That was 2016. It was my first harvest. And it kind of reminded me of all of the things that I first fell in love with about kitchens, all of the good parts, like the energy, the camaraderie. I mean, especially during harvest, just like the fast-paced intensity of it all. And I just knew that it was going to be no looking back. Just immediately caught the bug.
Catch back up there in a minute, but I'm curious about obviously starting with the passion of food and starting into the chef realm. Tell me about life in restaurants for you at that point. Obviously, you talked about what drove you and what motivated you, what excited you. What was it actually like? What was the work like? And what did you, as you look back now, what do you think about positively? What do you think about negatively?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said the first thing that always come to mind aren't the negatives. It's always the negatives. I think it's a pretty fucked up industry. Also, sorry, I'll try to not swear so much. I was raised by a whole bunch of sailors.
You can swear all you want.
Oh, perfect. Thank fucking God. I think it's awful. And, I think it's getting better. But, the whole notion of like the Gordon Ramsay-esque screaming asshole was celebrated. And I think to be fair to a lot of like my mentors' generations, that just was how it was. So you practice what you know. They all worked for the lunatic French chefs. Like my cousin Mark, God, I wish I could remember this guy's name, who he worked for. But he was one of those guys, like French chef, French brigade system, like you're not moving fast enough, fuck you, throwing the plates across the pass if it wasn't done just perfectly, make it again, yes, chef, no, chef, okay, chef, I'm sorry, chef. Not to mention, the sexism, misogyny, homophobia, wild drug use, and just alcoholism that was all qualified and okay. The like sophomoric humor that again was qualified because, oh, this is hard and we just need to make it through the shift. And calling you a fag is like okay and acceptable. I mean, that's why I was closeted for so many years, because you just learn that, well, they're going to beat up on you if they find out you're gay, and you also need to be okay with those jokes, so just keep your head down. So it's just, my whole upbringing in that world was challenging, because on one hand, the thing that brings me the most joy in the world is feeding people, or sharing a glass of wine with people, one that I made or one that I'm just excited about. And I think it was really hard for me to try to navigate these two things simultaneously. Like, I can't cope with this culture as much as I did and lied to myself that it was okay. And also, unfortunately, I will shamefully admit that I did a ton of things, I'm sure, while I was in that world that I'm not proud of. Because you just feed into it, you buy into it. And then trying to hold space at the same time for, well, if this is how it is, and I need to feed people, like it's not even a want, it's like a compulsion I have. How do I do it in a way that is squared with how awful this is? And again, from friends who still cook, it's gotten infinitely better than when I was kind of first coming up in that world, or when my mentors were coming up in that world. But I mean, that's ultimately what led to the demise of that industry for me. It's like, I just can't do this. I can't work 20 hours a day. At its worst, it's probably closer to 12. But then, go out to the bars afterwards, especially in Chicago, where 4 a.m. bars became 6 a.m. bars on the weekend, and you would just drink from, 1 when you get off until 6, go have a cup of coffee, boot and rally and then go back to work and do it all over again. I'm like, I'll die at 35 if I keep doing this. So those are all the negatives. Again, very easy to talk about. But I think the positives were, it's where I learned fundamentally the value of teamwork and how to really work on a team. And this is going to sound counter to a lot of the industry and how it operates, but like how to really remove ego from it. Like how to work on a team that is not just about you or your glorification or your ideas or, masturbatory artistic practice that you need to put onto a plate. Like it is just about feeding people within a team structure, which is awesome. It's beautiful and it's cool. And I think, at the end of the day, the hospitality industry is remarkable and awesome because it's about trying to make people feel comfortable and bring just a tiny bit of joy into their life, if not only for a half hour in an otherwise pretty challenging at times existence. Certainly easier for me than it is for, many other people in the world. But, challenging at times nonetheless. The Buddhists say life is suffering. That's like the one universal truth. So I think that's always the thing that drew me into food and to restaurants is like, how can I make someone happy while they're here? That's just an awesome idea. And then also because I'm a hedonistic glutton, like I want to be in a place where I just get to eat all day. That's pretty cool, I think, and this is inevitably what led me to wine, there's something so fascinating about cuisine and the infinite possibilities that exist there by virtue of, okay, let's take a carrot, let's taste that on its own, interesting. Okay, let's look at the pantry. What are all the things we have in there that could go with it and complement it and amplify it? Okay, well, we just added these three things, maybe, cumin, yogurt, and mint, interesting. Well, now we're kind of going into this realm of cuisine. What else could we add to it? What's going to accompany it? Is that a first course? Is it a second course? A third course? If so, what's going to come before it and what's going to precede it? Ooh, now we also have beverages. What can we add on to that? And just kind of like creating this orchestra of flavors. And again, that's probably why I loved music first and then food after. Thinking about how all of these disparate elements can create a really interesting and compelling whole, and how you can, I think the last part, to answer your question of what were the positives of restaurants is sharing one's interpretation of flavor with another person is fascinating. Like I've had so many bad meals, not because they were poorly made, but because the flavors just didn't make sense to me. But regardless, I always, even when I have a bad dish, bad meaning like I just don't care for it, I'm always still so fascinated by someone tasted this and really enjoyed it. And that's fascinating to me. Like that's cool to experience the way that somebody else understands flavor. Might not be my cup of tea, but that's okay. It excites someone else. Yeah. So, I guess to maybe put it a different way, connecting with people and understanding people through that like lingua franca of food is awesome. Yeah.
So you mentioned wine becoming part of your life, working for the Somm, for Jill. Tell me about, or not becoming part of your life, becoming a deeper part of your life at that point. Tell me about that deep dive for you. How did you go about learning wine? Was it what did you find the methods of sort of teaching yourself about it were, and what did you find most exciting at that point? Honestly, drinking and enjoying the way it felt. I for sure, and again, this is while I was still cooking, so I was still kind of buying into that chefy alcoholism is okay thing. So for sure, drinking way too much. But that is the honest answer. So just trying, like a lot of trying. Kind of during that time, obviously a lot of exposure was just through this really, really brilliant wine rep I had, Eric Freeberg, who now runs
the portfolio that he was actually representing at the time, New France in Minneapolis. Great book. Like they have, Dresner. And so he was also kind of my first exposure to natural wine, which is pretty, I actually don't think I'd ever realized that before. Way to go, Eric. So tasting from him, he was just so good about reading a menu and actually thoughtfully picking out wines to show you that would complement the food. So he set a pretty high bar, because I would, make dishes and then we would kind of taste and eat together. So immediately having these really thoughtful pairings and understanding, what wine is in context. That was a really important part of my study, I think, appreciating that wine doesn't really make sense until you're having it in context. Like you can have a great glass of wine, of course, and appreciate it on its own, but it's just not the same until you're actually eating it with something, I think. But so that was a big part of it, just, wine reps. And then also at the time, I can't remember if it was like just before I had started or maybe I was, had already started running this restaurant, a local kind of restaurant empire run by the Broder family in Minneapolis. They had just opened this new all-Italian wine bar with just a insane wine list, and it was run by another very talented industry professional there, Mel Goose. And I would go there almost every single day after service and just be like, what do you have? They had one of those, I can't remember what it's called, but those kind of like fancy, it's like a Coravin meets a wine fridge where you can have like 15 things available by the glass that you're not pulling a cork on. But so they would it was the first time I had ever had a bottle of Grosvenor, like old school, like OG natural wine from Italy, and like Radicon and, all of these brilliant natural wines that I could go in and just like casually have a glass of instead of spending, Grosvenor's like what, $180 a bottle before it's at a restaurant. So that was another big part of it for me. So my first love was actually Italian wine, funny enough, because I don't think I've had a glass of Italian wine in like 5 years. But so just tasting was a huge part of it. And then especially, when I was getting together with Jill and hearing the way that she would talk about wine, and it was just, immediately over my head. She's like, oh, so Ruben, I went to go visit that vineyard, and, fascinating, you'll see this type of geological formation at this part of the row, and then you walk another 50 paces and look to your right on a full moon, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ. So there was, when I really started sitting with her and hearing the way that she talked about wine and her just encyclopedic knowledge she was able to pull from, then I really started going down a course of self-guided study. So I can't remember who suggested this, but the first ever wine book that I bought was the, what is it? Windows on the World, Wine on the World, the Kevin Zraeli book.
Windows on the World, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And, just read that cover to cover several times. And I actually came across one of my old wine notebooks the other day where I had gone over and taken tracing paper and traced all of these maps of the various appellations to try to commit it to memory, and was also taking down notes of things I thought were compelling, like the German Prodicot system, which yawn. I mean, no thank you. Can't believe I ever thought that was cool. Understanding what, numbers correlated to which governing body and what they all meant, and but so I had that period of just kind of traditional, WSET, Master Somm type of thinking about wine. And then, when I came out, worked my first harvest at Division, got really excited about it. Luckily, at the urging of a friend who came from Australia to work with us for that harvest, was convinced to go work Southern Hemisphere. So I went to Margaret River, to a winery that he was really familiar with and recommended. And I was so thrilled, even though I got so much flack from all of my friends here, because at this point in time, I was very much on that dogmatic natural wine train. It's the only way to make wine, only thing worth drinking. But I went to go work for a very conventional producer, and am so grateful for that experience, because that's where I first fundamentally learned anything worthwhile about wine science and technical winemaking. And I remember on day one I showed up, and it was right when we got our barrel order for that year, and it was like 4 different coopers, but like spread across those 4 coopers, like 4 different forests, 25 different toast levels. And I remember kind of ribbing the winemaker, Luke Jolliffe. I was just like, come on, man, like, you don't notice a difference. And he got so serious. And he was like, no, like, this toast level, like CL+, this goes for this sub-parcel in this part of Margaret River because the soil type actually complements this clonal material on that soil type. And I remember thinking, dear fucking God, there's so much I don't know. And it was really that experience that sent me down the path of taking technical winemaking way more seriously. So I, asked him for a lot of recommendations on books, and again, read them all, like cover to cover, things that would, just bore most people to death. It's the Jackson wine science book, that like tome, and literally I think I've read it cover to cover like 5 or 6 times to date. But then also, made it a point every month to pick out some phenomenon within wine that I was interested by. Like I think the first one was fermentation kinetics within different types of vessels. So looking at amphora, concrete, and just went on to Google Scholar, plugged in a few key search items, got a website recommendation from a friend that can unlock all research articles so you don't have to pay for them, and would just like read hundreds and hundreds of pages of research, and then pick a new topic next month. And then it got to the point where I was like pulling up the UC Davis syllabus for the master's program and just like, picking out all of the information that I could without directly contacting professors, and kind of putting myself through a self-guided and, course of study that I didn't have to pay for. So a lot of it has just been obsessive studying on my own time. Really, yeah, again, like I can probably thank this winemaker Luke in Australia and my friend Jill for planting a seed of what it is to deeply understand a craft. Natural winemaking is great, especially philosophically. I think it's really important, especially a lot of the the original tenets kind of imparted upon us by the French gang in the 70s. But it's lost its way and become a dogma. And I think the biggest way in which it's done it is that there's this idea within natural wine of, oh, well, we don't intervene. We let the wine speak for itself and do what it wants. Fucking bullshit. What out here is natural? Like, come on. And I think when you really start to appreciate that, which I think anyone in their right mind has to at least admit it on some level, whether or not they want to uphold this idea of we don't intervene, the grapes speak for themselves, the wine, whatever happens with the wine is what it's meant to be. There is a technical side to craft. And at least for me, I, as much as I say all of that, like if that works for you, great. I mean that genuinely, if that's what makes you happy. There's room for all philosophies and ways of doing things in the industry, and there should be. But for me, I don't feel like I can say that I really put my all into something if I don't fundamentally understand what's going on and don't understand the consequences and implications of all the decisions that I made. I think that, to me, that is like really engaging with craft. So I think, when I decided wine and wine growing is what I really wanted to do, it kind of wasn't an option for me to not study and understand.
Tell me about your first harvest.
Division. Yeah, it was so awesome. Because like that was still in the early days-ish for Division, I think. I actually can't remember when they made their first wine. But, like still early on, and it was while they still had the Southeast Wine Collective. So when I was there, I wasn't really just working for one wine, or I guess two, Tom and Kate. I wasn't just working for 2 winemakers. I was working for I don't think I could even remember every single one if I tried like 20 different winemakers. And that's not to say that I was helping all of them, but you're in a space where you got to see that many more approaches and ideologies and varieties and vineyards. So it was a just beautiful first exposure to harvest and winemaking. Really got a lot of bang for my buck. And, luckily, both Tom and Kate pretty much from day one saw like a lot of potential in my dedication. So really were incredibly generous and gracious in letting me kind of do anything and everything that I wanted, and put a lot of trust in me. So like, sorry, I'm just remembering this one moment because like, they saw that I like knew I was comfortable with like heavy machinery and stressful, fucked up situations. So I remember like pretty early on, they're like, okay, you're going to go pick up our fruit in Yakima. And they have this old, I think they still have it, this old piece of shit, like yellow flatbed truck. And like partway back, it would have been, so I went and picked up fruit. I think they like forgot to tell me what the safe weight capacity was, and I was there with the vineyard owner, and he's like 4'5", like, farms massive amounts of orchard out there and pretty gruff. He was looking at the truck. He's like, oh yeah, that can take 7 tons for sure. And I like picked kind of heavy for Tom and Kate today, so you'll take it. I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, you know what you're talking about. Obviously, I don't fucking know. And then the brakes failed partway back. They were like kind of coming on and off intermittently, but I'm not sure if any of you have driven to Yakima, but when you're coming back, you're kind of approaching the gorge. You come up over this pretty steep, ridge line. And I just remember I had the pedal to the floor and I was like barely doing 20 up this path. And I get to the top and start going down, and something kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, I have to be able to stop. It's like hairpin turns. And there were a couple of times where like the brakes just it was just like there was nothing to them. They just like stopped. So I was just like flying around these turns, like taking lanes wide with my hazards on, just like holding the horn down. And they kind of came back on here and there, but yes, anyways, fun memories from my first harvest. Point being, there was something about that experience that really reminded me of kitchens in a way, where it's kind of like it's like cowboy culture. It's just like, you can kind of prepare as best you can, but all your shit's gonna break right when you need it most. And you just have to figure it out. And I think there was something about that spirit of it. Unless you're working in Napa and the Disney world of winemaking, where you have every brand new tool and it's perfect and sparkly. They all have it so fucking easy there. It's ridiculous. All those people in their puffy Patagonia vests and walking around with clipboards. There's something there was just something so fun and hard, but in a good way about it. And again, part of it was just the nature of that space. It's 20 winemakers crammed into a 3,500 square foot building, if that was like formerly a like industrial cleaning warehouse or something. Like nothing about it should have been a winery. We had a pop-up tent out in the parking lot where we would have half of our ferments, and like, this ramshackle locked gate to keep all the houseless people from climbing in there and doing God knows what. But yeah, it was just such a fun and cool experience. I'm sure I broke hundreds, if not thousands, of OSHA guidelines, and loved every moment of it.
They're just guidelines.
Yeah, exactly. They're just guidelines. But yeah, it just felt like the Wild West in a certain way. So yeah, that was the first harvest. But again, like Tom and Kate were just so great about like, oh, you really care about this. Oh, you want to taste more? Let me like call John House, even though he doesn't know you at all. Oh, and because we said like, you're a nice guy, this was when they still had Le Cave, or I guess now Barnina, but like they hadn't opened yet. And John had me over we tasted together for like 3.5 hours, and he was talking to me like I was some industry veteran who had any idea what I was talking about, but was just like so gracious with his time. Yeah, and they did that with a few other people as well, like Jeff Veer. Kate called him and was like, you need to take this kid out to your vineyard, show him around. So he like took me to David Hill and like walked me up and down the rows, pointed out every single vine and what it was. And so I think, luckily I'm a hard worker, but really have Tom and Kate to thank for like opening so many doors for me in the industry here.
So you mentioned after that you went to Australia, saw a whole different type of winemaking. I'm curious, after that or during that, what did you see as your path forward? What were you sort of anticipating or hoping for at that point?
Yeah, I think I knew that I really wanted to take winemaking a tiny bit more seriously than I had. Again, I kind of said it was like the Wild West at Division. Not to say I didn't learn things and there wasn't good winemaking, but that first vintage really kind of felt like play a bit more than anything. And so Australia really instilled in me this idea of thinking deeply, critically, and really like seriously investing your time into developing craft. So I think that was one part of it. It also taught me that I never wanted to make conventional wine. And I don't say that to think that what I do is better or what any of my colleagues do is better. It's just different. Like, it's just the path and style that makes more sense to me. It was more conventional. Actually isn't the part of it that turned me off. I should take that back. It was the scale of things and just the enormity of it all. I mean, I would be doing pump overs on like 40,000 gallon tanks. And I'm just like, I don't feel excited by this. Like the wine was brilliant. The wine at this place is so good. It's still some of my favorite wine from Australia, but it didn't connect with me in a way where I felt like it was a handmade product. I kind of have a tradition of getting a tattoo after every harvest. And I actually got this basket press tattooed on my hand while I was in Australia, right after that harvest, as a reminder that I always wanted whatever I did to be handmade, that I always wanted my hands on it. Not that I need to like exercise some sort of like meticulous control. Happy and hopefully we'll have one day people working with me. But that like it's something that is done by people's hands in a meaningful way. It's not mechanically harvested fruit. It's not pouring something into a massive fermenter from 30 different vineyards and just making a red blend. Like it's about place, But then I think the other thing that really came out of that experience while I was at this place, Stella Bella, working in Margaret River, there was this really brilliant bar, like just weird bullshit towny bar, that I think was just called the Tavern. I think, or we called it the Tav. I can't remember, but it was like the place that everyone in the industry, all the seasonal harvest workers would go. And they have, still to this day, out of all of the places I've been, one of the best wine lists I have ever experienced. And of course, like just Australian. In Australia, you pretty much just drink Australian wine. Or Bordeaux. There's a weird, funnel or pipeline there. But I remember looking at this list, and again, all the people I was working for, very conventionally minded, traditional, kind of like technocratic winemakers. They just like endlessly gave me shit about liking and loving and believing in natural wine. And I remember looking at this wine list, and they had so this was in 2017, and they had a 2009 bottling of Anton van Klopper's wine. Lucy Margot. He was kind of like one of the very early and original natural winemakers in southern Australia, in Adelaide. And he was one of my first exposures to Australian wine, and particularly natural wine. So it was a 2009 Pinot Noir from his home vineyard. And it was still, I can close my eyes and like remember this wine, like how it tasted, how it smelled. And it was fucking perfect. And he's, very dogmatic, 0-0 to fault at times. You hear that, Anton? You used to make clean wine. And I remember even that, like sitting with the winemaker I was working for, all of his permanent cellar staff, all of them even were like, this is really good. And there was something about that experience of like, see, even the conventional people can get on board with it where it's done well, that also served to, really solidify my love for that style and approach to winemaking. All that being said, I think it just really helped propel me forward and maintain my passion and love and interest in wine. Yeah.
So what came next?
Next, I came back to Portland and worked another harvest at Division. That was another one of my main takeaways from Australia, is that like, I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but I just had this feeling of you can't really learn a ton in one harvest. So I hoped by going back to Division a second time, which proved to be true, I could better understand style and what the implications are of stylistic decisions, and getting to see, Tom and Kate do a great job of working with the same vineyards year after year. So like getting to see the same vineyards 2 years in a row, taste the wines in the cellar that I had helped make the previous year, then we put into bottle, some over vintage, so getting to taste them again, just like really trying to develop a deeper understanding with one winery. So I did that, then went down to New Zealand in 2018 on the South Island and just outside of Nelson. That was my first like real dogmatic natural wine making experience. This guy Alex Craighead, who has a winery called Canby, he actually had like a fancy high-end label that had sulfur in it that he made for his wife. That's now since been pushed aside. He just hates sulfur. But yeah, so it was like very 0-0. And he was another one of those people who went to university, to the best of my recollection. So had like a really deep understanding of technical winemaking and learned so many great tricks from him. And then I think before that, I spent some time back home in Minnesota, working some vineyards there during the winter, like pruning. Spent some time with John and Jenny Tull, who run the hybridization program at the University of Minnesota. That's kind of where my like love for hybrids came from, and passion for them. So yeah, winter in Minnesota, New Zealand. Spent the summer working for some people in Vermont, again to like try to expand my understanding of hybrids, working with them, farming them. So kind of spent that like farming season out there. Then had a harvest in the Sierra foothills with Matthew Rourke of Forlorn Hope, who's, if you ask about mentors, he far and away is like the first person that comes to mind for me when I think about mentor. We were just like two peas in a pod. Think about wine in exactly the same way. We would, do these like big dinners that I would cook every single night after, harvest. And like half the table would be falling asleep while him and I are like sitting and talking about tannin polymerization in a reductive setting and what tannin bridging is, especially when you're talking about low phenolic varieties and how do you build it and what's the best way to do it. And oh, interesting. Well, we could do a submerged cap, no pump over. What is the implications of temperature stratification and what does that mean for volatile phenolic compounds? Will they actually stay longer because there's no oxygen to bind? Just like, people are like drooling and half asleep, and we're probably very drunk and think we sound a lot more intelligent than we actually did. Anyways, so that was then. And then I came back to Portland again and helped Scott Frank at Bow and Arrow finish out his harvest. Because at some point that summer I agreed to come on as his assistant winemaker. So that was my first kind of like full-time permanent position. So yeah, wrapped up 18 with him, did the 19 harvest with him. And then unfortunately when the pandemic hit, he had to lay me off. So I went back down to California to Matthew Rourke's place, and spent a good chunk of time there working with him, kind of his like interim assistant winemaker / do everything guy. It's a really, really remarkable property, but comically dilapidated. It was built. So Jesus, it had to have been established, I think, in like, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, like the late 1800s, but wasn't like really built and established fully as a winery and vineyard until the 60s. But so there are a lot of these buildings there that are just like being held together by like glue. So it's like always kind of fixing things, and it's the not glamorous side of winemaking that nobody tells you about. You need to know how to do plumbing. You need to know how to do electrical repair. You need to understand when one of the interns tell you that they're being shocked when they get inside the tank, why the fuck that is possible, given that there is nothing electrical hooked up to that tank. So, just kind of did a tiny bit of everything there. And it's this like 360 acre ranch with 60 or 70 acres under vine, like 45 different varieties, more when you consider the test block. So it's just like a real stomping ground for, like a alchemist in a kitchen pantry. Like there was just so much to learn and experiment with, which is also part of why I consider him such a great mentor. Like him and I we always have some sort of, crazy notion in our head of like, well, what if we tried this? And his answer was always yes. So we really got to experiment and play and try a lot of different things there. But so yeah, I was there for a bit. And unfortunately, he just wasn't in a position where he could pay me a ton. And I had to put on my big kid pants. And as much as I loved being there, I was like, I kind of need to earn money so I can have some savings and maybe go to the dentist. That'd be pretty cool. So I ended up accepting a year-long position with Brock as their assistant winemaker in Berkeley. All the while just kind of like biding my time and trying to figure out how I could get back to Oregon, because this is where I always wanted to be and like meaningfully set up an operation and roots and so on and so forth. So was there for a year, came back. My friend Drew Herman and I were going to try to start something together, but it just like didn't quite pan out, partly because we had this foolhardy notion that you don't need money to, take over a vineyard or build a winery or start something. So that unfortunately kind of crumbled. And I ended up taking that opportunity to go work a harvest in France. I'd always wanted to work in the old world, but because I'm a new world winemaker and, we're in the same hemisphere, can't. So I went to the Jura, which was just unreal. I met so many of my wine heroes and idols there who were all lovely. Whoever says don't meet your idols, they must have had really shitty ones, because mine are great. Like in the middle of harvest, sent the Demours a message, and I was like, hey, I know this is a really challenging time of year, but is there any way I could just like stop by and shake your hand? Like, I don't need to visit. I just want to like say thank you. They're like one of the producers who inspired me to start making wine. Not only did they say yes, they're like, yeah, come by, we'll taste through the cellar, and then you can have lunch with us and our family afterwards. And I was like, the fuck? Like, no one in America would say yes to that if you hit them up in the middle of harvest. They're like, November. Yeah. Actually, I take that back. We're too tired. Come June of next year and we'll happily visit with you. So just had this like beautiful experience while I was there. Then doubled down that year actually on harvest, got back, had like 2 days to recover from jet lag, and then went and gave my friends the Maloofs a hand for harvest. And that actually ended up being the inaugural vintage of my project. Got a call from one of my really good friends, Nathan Wood, who is the farmer of Johann these days. Just good people. He's actually the person who gave me my first proper tractor driving lesson, really like meaningfully taught me how to prune, took me through his vineyards and taught me like the basics of disease, pest, and nutrient deficiency identification. So yeah, really important person to me. But he called me and was last minute like, hey, I have a tiny bit of extra fruit from my family's vineyard down in Elkton. Would you be interested? And I was like, oh my God, like that vineyard has always been at the top of my list of places to work with. So yeah, very quickly said yes. And that kind of launched it. And then, so that was, what was that, 22? And then in 23, again, I was like, I don't really want to work for other people anymore, but I'm an adult with expenses. I need a job. So I ended up taking one last full-time job working for other people out in the gorge at Idiot's Grace in Mosier. So I just left at the end of April, but I was their associate winemaker, technically assistant vineyard manager, but that doesn't feel quite right. I just, again, like helped out with whatever needed doing. But yeah, so that's kind of like the full wine arc, as it were.
Places in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah.
Tell me about.
I'm a bit of a sadist, so it makes it easier. Yeah.
So coming out of all of those experiences, when you had a chance to have some grapes of your own, tell me about, before we talk about sort of the brand and all of that, tell me about sort of, I guess we'll say the ethos. Tell me about what you wanted to put into the world now that you had the control.
It's funny. You'd think I would be better at talking about this part, given that I've, done enough harvest, heard enough people talk about wine, started my own brand, have to sell it, have to talk about it a bunch. That's kind of an ever-evolving thing. I mean, on some level, I probably had some poetic, altruistic idea of what I wanted to do and say from day one. But, like I just said, really at the end of the day, the first vintage came about because a friend called me and said, this is what I have available, so that's what I decided to make. I was always interested by Elkton, and particularly with this vineyard from the first time I ever went down there back in, I think it was 2017 was the first time I went down there, as being a sparkling site. There's something about Elkton that just feels like it's perfect for sparkling for me. And I could certainly come up with a whole bunch of technical reasons why, but that's boring. It's just a feeling for me. It's just a gut. Like it just, probably the fog in the air that's always there. But so when Nathan called, said he had fruit, I actually guess technically it was our friend Meredith who called and told me, take it back, don't want to shortchange her. Meredith Bell, Statera, great wines. I was hoping that the fruit would come in because it was already picked and it would be good for Avant Clair, for traditional method sparkling, and luckily enough it was. Like I started pressing it, wrote a custom program on the fly, assuming it would be good for that, and I tasted it coming out of the pan and ran the pH, and I was like, oh my God, this is like in the perfect window for sparkling. So, I hoped that was the case. It turned out to be. And, even before that, I knew that the two things that I really wanted to do would be hybrids and sparkling wine. Other things for sure, but those I knew I wanted to be the main focus. So, from like just purely a winemaking perspective, and my, every winemaker has a need to just express themselves. That for sure is what it was for me. But then in terms of the ethos, and this is where I'm still, it's ever evolving and I struggle to give just like a concrete answer to this. Like I said, the tenets of natural wine that really drew me in is an appreciation for craft, that, vintage to vintage variation is okay and desirable, and that we need to care about the land. So I think, just like from a base ethos, that's like the founding principle, is how are you thinking about place and vintage in a meaningful way, and how are you conveying that? And when I started thinking about it more, and this is one of my biggest gripes with natural wine, is people want to talk about how much sulfur they're putting in or not putting in, or what their farming is, which of course is important. They never lead with people, it feels like. Who works for you? Do you pay them? Are you just relying on free labor like most people in the natural wine industry? If you are managing to pay them and you're calling it a living wage, what's your definition of living wage? Oh, you give them a place to live during harvest? That's cool. What is the state of it? Is it full of black mold? Is it safe to live in? So I think, a really big part of it for me too is it's first and foremost about people. That's what excites me about wine. That's why I was originally drawn to wine. It's why I still am in wine, is people. Wine is the first place where I found like I was truly accepted for who I am, where I felt comfortable being myself, where I could come out, where I could be seen as someone who knew what they were talking about. And I'll, I will happily own that there is a huge, ego drive within that for me. Like, yeah, I want to be seen as someone who knows what they're talking about. It feels good to have someone who you respect and admire look at you and be like, that's a really good point, And even without realizing I had that need at first, like it happened. So I think, because of that and appreciating the community component of the wine industry and the connection that I immediately found with so many people, one of the founding principles of the brand really quickly became, how can I honor all of the people that have brought me to this day? So I wanted to make wine that was inspired by people that are important to me or were a formative part of my experience or reminded me of them. And actually, somewhat recently, another part of this that came out, because as part of my self-guided course of study of becoming the curmudgeon-y little old man Jew that I will be one day, I listened pretty religiously to Mark Maron's podcast, What the Fuck? And this was probably back in January. He had a guest on, and they asked him, like, what is your creative process with comedy? Like, tell me about your artistic practice. And he had this brilliant line that has really stuck with me that I've started using for my own purposes, which is, my drive is to understand and communicate. And I think that's a huge thing of what I really want to do with wine. And that's like one of the founding principles and like driving ethi, what's the plural, of of wine for me, which is, how can I understand and then communicate what I've learned? But, not even just the wine itself, but, the land, like what can I understand and communicate? And also then person to person, like, again, like kind of removing the wine, but just using that as the focal point that allows for deeper understanding and communication. Like, how can I have the opportunity to sit down with somebody, maybe you, or you, or you, or you, or you, and have a meaningful conversation where we're trying to understand one another, get on one another's level, and appreciate that we might have radically different thoughts, life experiences, ways of being, but at the end of the day, we can probably still get along, if even for a moment. I have no sort of unrealistic romantic notion of wine saving the world, but I love anything that just allows for even a brief moment of human connection and understanding.
So tell us about the first wine you made.
Man, it has been a motherfucker. Like I said, I wanted it. So this first wine, and technically not the first wine that I made actually, but like the launch of the brand officially, I made some one-offs. Technically the first thing I ever made was in 2018, and it was a Piquette while I was working for Scott. Wait, 2018? 2019. One of the two. Tried to get a brand going year after year. Pandemic hit, couldn't. Down in California at Forlorn Hope, made 2 wines that year, but then left. Didn't have the bandwidth while I was at Brock, so there have been a lot of start and stops. But so 22 is what I consider like the true first vintage. And like I said, that was from Tuckaway, and it was a blend of Chenin, Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc, and Milan de Bourgogne, supposedly. We don't actually know for sure. I tell people that it's 5% Milan because that's our estimate. So that came in. I processed it, assuming that it would be good for traditional method. And it was like 1.5 tons or so. So it ended up being, I think it was like 85 cases or something I put down on tirage, to the surprise of all of my sparkling wine mentors. They're like, coming out of the gate pretty hot there, young buck. And then immediately shit went wrong. I still don't know. I called all of my sparkling wine gurus, and Mara Ambrose, who's the woman who taught me how to make sparkling wine. That's Matthew Rourke's partner. She was the enologist for Schramsberg for years. Pretty prolific sparkling wine house in California, if you're unfamiliar. And all of them were like, you did everything right. One person, it actually might have been her, and this just scared me to my bone. She's like, yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, the most like technically persnickety type of wine you can make, it requires so much time and energy. And then you're telling me that sometimes it just doesn't work? What? So, put this down on tirage, and it was like there was some sort of issue with the yeast culture. Maybe there was something inhibitory in the base wine, so it just like didn't ferment. And I was just like, okay, great. So I like started popping bottles. And I don't know what it was about that day, but I just like made it barely through, like I think, 2 cases or something. And I very reluctantly was like, okay, I'm just gonna like empty it, and maybe it'll be topping wine, or I'll re-ferment it, add new culture, blah, blah, blah. But like got 2 cases in, all of a sudden that day it was just sparkling. Like it just started fermenting. So yeah, like I said, that wine has just driven me up a wall. So it's still on tirage. It's gonna be disgorged hopefully this year, if it tastes ready. But then also to add to the fun of it, when I initially pressed all of that fruit, before I even went down on tirage, there was a portion of it that just wouldn't go dry. Like it was something about that barrel, and this is the beauty, the frustrating beauty of natural wine. It just was sweet, and it just wouldn't go for like 2 years. It stopped at 17 grams, and that was just it. So I ended up bottling that as like a off-dry Coteau Champenois. So, part of why I say this and how challenging it is, frustrating, not what I intended, is that's also part of what excites me. Like as much as I can have this intention of what I want to make, if I'm going to adhere to this style of winemaking and this ethos, I also have to be open to being humbled by the craft a tiny bit and the experience, and exercise it enough to still put something in bottle that is sound, consistent, and tasty, all the while appreciating that even though this wasn't what I intended, it's still something that's good. So yeah, from that first wine, there ended up being 2 wines. Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, exactly.
You had talked earlier about your love of or interest in hybrid wines, and which brings us here today. Right. So tell me about the interest in hybrid wines and how you found this.
Yeah, so I guess starting with how I found this, my partner, who might have been the one who told you I was back here, works for a veggie farm at this property called Empowered Flowers. They lease land from Dave Ward. And she came home from work one day holding a bottle of wine. I was like, oh, what's that? She said, oh, this is like Dave's, home brew. Gives everyone a bottle every year. You should try it. And I looked at the label and it said Leon Mio. I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Like, this is one of the varieties I've wanted to work with. Where did he get the fruit? And she's like, oh, he has a vineyard here. I was like, yeah, of course. So it was very kismet. Like, it just kind of happened. So immediately I came out here and, just like kind of looked at the vineyard and chatted with Dave. So that was the beginning of 23. And this was shortly after I had convinced my boss former boss at Idiot's Grace to plant some hybrids out there, one of which was Leon Mio. So we decided to purchase a tiny bit of fruit in 23 from Dave to play with so we could get our heads around it. And then in 24, I purchased some for myself and then had the conversation with him about starting to farm part of it with the assumption that eventually I'll take over all of the plot. So that's kind of how this came to be. Again, it was just a very happy coincidence and very lucky. But the real interest, there's, what's her name? Patty Skinkins? Skinkus, thank you. I can never remember how to say her last name. She I remember there was an interview with her where she very, firmly said, it's not possible to have a no-spray vineyard in Oregon. It's like, not true. Just can't be vinifera. And I think, again, pulling from kind of like my early interest in natural wine and a lot of the philosophical tenets and just like, the ethos of it being like, how do you care for the land in a meaningful way? Unfortunately, Oregon is built on Pinot Noir. I say unfortunately for a couple of reasons. I don't like it. I think it's a pretty boring variety. I've been fortunate to try some of the best, and I still don't really get it. But from a farming perspective, it doesn't make any sense here. I mean, you have to spray it so goddamn frequently, and then you still might end up with a wine that's kind of, they call it a heartbreak grape for a reason. But purely from the farming, like if we're talking about having to spray something, if it's, especially if it's a high mildew site, every 7 days from like woolly bud on to 2 weeks prior to harvest, can you really say that you're farming sustainably and ethically? Like, especially, like, what is your equipment like as well? Do you have, some open tractor that's not closed? Are you providing your tractor operator with adequate PPE? There's just a lot of questions there. What are the environmental implications of one, putting a combustible engine through your vineyard that many times, but also spraying sulfur that much for your health and for the land? So I couldn't help but think, part of this is just having a good enough understanding of hybrids in places like Minnesota and Vermont, where it's so hard. Understanding how they grow there, and then thinking, well, if you take a variety like that, where it's developed and hybridized with the purpose of being able to understand the insane pressure there, bringing it here where pressure is, like a quarter, if not even less, relatively speaking, would you have to spray? And that was really confirmed for me coming out here. Since this vineyard was planted in 2000, or this portion, and then that portion in 2004, it has never once been sprayed. And even when I was out this morning, just going through and doing another round of shoot thinning, I can see parts of the canopy where there was an initial powdery infection that the vine fought off and killed. Or, killed. I'm using that as a bit of a misnomer, but like it has complete resistance, more or less. Last year, just on these end vines here, partly because they have their sprinkler system, where there was just really, really dense, canopy, I found like 2 leaves that had powdery mildew on it, but nothing on the clusters. So for me, if I want to call myself a natural winemaker, or, let's remove that term since it's so poorly defined and means so many different things. If I want to say that I care about the land, I care about the people, and I fundamentally care about the environmental implications of working in a monocrop and making wine, which at the end of the day is a luxury good, how can I work to mitigate how I am affecting the environment? And this is the most meaningful way we can do it, especially in the light of climate change. Like if we want to continue to have an industry here, a wine industry, we need to start taking these varieties more seriously. And I went to the Oregon Wine Symposium this year and reluctantly sat in on a talk about, the climate and what varieties are going to be well suited. And I say reluctantly because somewhere in my being, I knew there would not be one mention of hybrids. And I was right. They're just beating people over the head with Cab Franc, which is cool. And they're not wrong based off of their, models and predictions. But why would you not be talking about hybrids? And, I think it's going to be a long road because inevitably it's going to take a lot of people who are seen as good winemakers making wines from these grapes alongside vinifera to prove to people and, help acclimatize people's palate to them that they can be taken seriously, they can make world-class wines. But it just baffles me that people would, put themselves on a pedestal talking about how they, are building soil and boosting, biological activity in it, but then they're doing 30 tractor passes in a season and spraying sulfur, and when they could have the opportunity to do something like this. It just seems like such a no-brainer to me.
So tell me about the varietal. Tell me about Leon Milo. What is different about working with it beyond what you've talked about, and what does it produce?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure a lot of that out. The cool thing about the industry is that it's a tight-knit community, and if I'm having an issue with a ferment or working with a new variety, I have no shortage of people I can call and ask for tips or advice or, anecdotes about their experience, and that is just simply not the case with hybrids. The list is growing now that, especially given the hard work and foundation that people like Deirdre Hinken in Vermont have laid, there is more knowledge to pull from, but it's still not a ton. So part of how I got turned on to this variety is from Matthew down at Forlorn Hope. He has a small portion of his vineyard planted to this variety, so I knew it existed. But while I was there, I think he had just planted, so we hadn't actually received a crop yet. So kind of called him and I was like, what do you know? What can you tell me? What kind of wine does this want to make? And even he was like, I don't really know, man. I can give you anecdotes. Because he went to All Sauce and tried to find some wines, and it's really hard to find any sort of varietal bottlings. People use it as a blending component. But while he was there, he kind of learned that anecdotally it's good for sparkling. So people do make pet nats out of it with some level of success. But yeah, so I didn't really know. He made a red wine and said he enjoyed it quite a bit, but it was pretty prone to oxidation. So I tried to take, all of these little anecdotes that I'd heard with zero ability to pull research or, understand fermentation kinetics or, chemical parameters that it wants to be harvested within. Just took a rider. So it's a very inky grape. It's not Tenturier, but you would look at it and think it is. You squeeze the grapes and you're just stained. So I was like, okay, interesting. So lean into that. Red wine, still red wine. One of the other anecdotal bits of information I got is that you cannot get tannin out of it. Not possible. So I just took that as a challenge and decided to try to make a tannic red wine, which I did. But so yeah, the first 24 was just kind of a rider, just experimenting. So I made a still red wine that was done almost entirely under submerged cap. And then the hope, for the process of, or for the sake of exploration and discovery, every year I want to try, until I run out of ideas, some sort of new method or approach to vinification, while maintaining that initial success of still red wine. So 25 will be a still red wine, and then I'll do a portion that's direct press for traditional method to see. Then 26, the plan is to do a pasito or something kind of along those lines. But yeah, so I don't have a good answer to your question of what does it want to be or how does it behave or, what is its what is the typicity of it. We're still kind of figuring that out. Yeah, the only thing I could say for sure is that when it's made on its skins, it wants to drop acid and oxidize. Those are the only two things I know for sure.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So tell me about creating your brand, the meaning behind the name, and bringing wine to market. What has it been like getting wines in front of people?
Yeah. Well, so I suppose starting with the brand meaning. So Amiti is a Hebrew word that's kind of tangentially related to the word mensch, which is Yiddish. Mensch is a do-gooder, person who, volunteers at the soup kitchen or, dedicates their life to nonprofit work, wants to improve the world. And And Amiti, like the direct translation would be like truth, my truth, true companion, friend, something kind of along those lines. But as I've read it and come to understand it more and seen it used in context, and especially when I'm out talking about the brand, I say it's the unique qualities an individual uses to do good in the world. So kind of like I said earlier, a lot of the ethos and like drive behind why I make wine is bringing people together and trying to create bridges between one another. So the wines are really meant to be a sincere portrayal of what I think it is to be an ethical producer and grower, and hopefully exist as like sincere portrayals of how I feel and am excited about wine, what I think the future of Oregon wine is, and hopefully again can be like a reason to just gather and enjoy one another's company. And then in terms of selling, was that the other part of your question?
Getting wines in front of
Yeah, getting wines in front of people. So I'm pretty lucky that I really took a good amount of time to be in the industry before, especially in Portland, before releasing anything. So I'm quite fortunate to be somewhat of a known entity and have good relationships with a lot of different restaurants and shops around town. So getting in front of people has actually proven to be somewhat easy. Like, luckily, a lot of people knew that I had something in the works and were pretty excited to try it when it was ready. But I'll happily admit I'm a pretty fucking insecure person and usually don't like anything that I ever do. So there's a lot of nerves sitting down and, having this thing that I've spent years working on in front of people and, running the risk of having someone say like, this isn't for me. But I think the bigger thing that I was really nervous about in getting in front of people is how people would react to hybrids. It's part of why I said, like, when you first got here and I was just showing you the property, why I said I didn't take it over all from day one, because what the fuck would I potentially do with 12 tons of Leon Mio if nobody likes the wine that comes from it? Not to mention, like, I didn't necessarily know how I wanted to make it and if it would be a success from year one. But so I think that was, really the only part that was nerve-wracking to me. I've tasted a lot of wine, and even with my kind of aforementioned disdain for everything that I make, or, the ways that I can see, it could have been better, or I should have done this. Even when I got things in bottle and I tasted them before going out to do sales, I was like, oh shit, I actually really like this. This is pretty good. It's the first time I think I've ever said that about something I've made. But so I felt like somewhat confident being like, okay, I know at least on a base level, these are like sound wines. I'm not foolhardy enough to think that every single thing that I will make will be universally liked. At the end of the day, wine's subjective. But yeah, like going and pouring hybrids for people, I wasn't sure what they would think. A really important part of the brand that I forgot to touch on is I have a tremendous disdain for the way that wine is traditionally talked about. I think it's really limiting, but it's also kind of cultish. And it doesn't really invite people into the conversation when they haven't been a part of it before. So like if you're a brand new wine drinker and maybe you've only ever had one Chardonnay and it was poured for you by a sommelier who said, here's what it tastes like and this is why. On some level, you're probably thinking, okay, well, I had that experience once. They told me, it's kind of like reductive and this is what reduction tastes like, but I'm not getting that right now. So I must be doing something wrong. And the nerves that come along with that are just so defeating. So because of that, as a way to try to eschew traditional tasting notes, I don't list varieties on my label. I just have a poetic proprietary name that's based off of a memory that came to mind for me when I first tasted after bottling. So that actually made hybrids a lot easier. So like I went to go pour for the folks at E&R. I kind of told them the whole shtick. I was like, I'll for sure tell you guys what the varieties are. Like, you're professionals, you want to know. Here's why I don't provide it initially. And they're like, no. Don't tell us, we want to play. And they kind of took it as a blinding challenge, Again, not the intention, but I was like, cool, this is fun. I'm like actually interested to see what they think. So it came time to the hybrid, and I'm kind of like sitting there sweating under my shirt, and they taste it, and all of them immediately are like, where the fuck did you get Negro Amaro in Oregon? Wow. It's like, nope, try again. You know, and there were a few more guesses. I think there was maybe a Cab Franc, another Italian variety that's escaping me. And it felt so good to reveal that it was a hybrid and have them all say, wow, this is just good wine. And I think it proves that at the end of the day, what's most important is not, you know, the supposed hierarchy or supremacy of vinifera, but just like, does it taste good? Do I like it? And if the answer is yes to both of them, then why the fuck would you not drink it and get excited? So, yeah, all that being said, like it's luckily been a very positive experience. Yeah,
good.
Yeah,
Good.
Yeah.
What comes next? What have you not done yet that you want to do next?
Sell more wine. You know, unfortunately, the market's not exactly in the best of places. It's pretty challenging. And that's not to say I'm unhappy with how sales have gone at this point, but, you know, got to sell more wine. What do I want to do? I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing. I don't have any sort of grandiose notions of, you know, becoming some like world famous winemaker or having a huge production that pays me one day. Like, I do this because I love it. You know, the goal is to one day get up to 650 cases and kind of cap it there. Like I said, I want this to be something that comes from my hands and maybe the hands of a select few friends, or, you know, maybe hopefully one day someone I could mentor. You know, that's kind of the goal. Keeping the ball rolling, teaching as much as possible. But yeah, I think like getting to a place where 650 cases is sustainable in whatever way that means. Like, it breaks even every year and maybe gives me like a cute $5,000 bonus on top of my day job or something, you know. I try really hard to not come in too hot with my own ideas of like something I want to make every vintage. You know, this is a bit of a unique situation given that it's a hybrid without a ton of history. So like, I'll oblige and try some different ideas for the sake of seeing what might work. But, you know, I don't want to be like, I need to build a program that has Vin Jaune and like, you know, a crazy skin contact wine and something done in amphora and 30 different varieties. And yeah, just try to be one with the process, I guess, and take advantage of opportunities that come my way if it makes sense. Like, there's that vineyard I told you about in the Gorge that I'm farming. And that came about because a friend called and said it's available. And it's like, okay, sure, let's try it. See if it works, see if it makes sense. So now I'm gonna make Riesling. Like, I love Riesling. I didn't necessarily start this brand thinking I have to make Riesling, but yeah, let's try it. Maybe I'll do this one vintage. I don't like the wine that comes from it, or, you know, it's a vineyard that has a lot of problems and maybe it just won't pan out or make financial sense. But yeah, just keep on farming, trying to learn more about it so I can maybe comfortably call myself a farmer one day. It's not a term I feel prepared to use for myself yet. Again, like, try to take care of anyone who's a part of what I do. Pay people an actual wage that, you know, isn't offensive. Try to minimize my carbon footprint. Try to source ethically and responsibly, and hopefully continue to make good, sound, consistent wines. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about sort of you seeing the future for Oregon and elsewhere with hybrids as being part of that future. Tell me about, as you look ahead, how realistic is it that this will become something that gets bigger than it is, and what are the sort of the steps along that way?
I don't know if it's realistic. You know, I think in wine and a lot of other craft-driven industries, there is a desire to maintain supremacy of authority. And there's a lot of different taste makers who do that. Sometimes they're winemakers, sometimes they're somms, sometimes they're importers and distributors. But inevitably there's someone who is saying, this is what's important, this is what is the best, and this is what should be here. And I think until there is a radical shift in that thought and language and approach that those people are employing, and until there is a time where they can become a tiny bit more open-minded and maybe put aside their notions of Burgundy being the be-all, end-all, we're never going to get there. I'm hopeful, given my limited experience of going out and pouring this, first hybrid wine for people, but I also have poured it for a lot of people who have turned up their nose at what I'm charging for it because they think it's not justified. And when I've tried to push them on what they mean by that, it again comes back to, well, it's not Burgundy. You're not a, fourth generation producer with a ton of history behind you. How dare you? So, I don't know. I think, again, luckily the tides are kind of shifting and there are enough people in a renowned wine region like the Willamette Valley that are starting to experiment with it, that it's going to shift, and that's what we need. We need more people growing this. If I could somehow convince, David Lett and A to Z to start producing hybrids like that. I mean, that's what we need. We need a really well-respected boutique producer and then just a monolith to start working with it. That's what it's going to take. And I think we also need more people like me, just small boutique producers who have good connections with reputable shops and restaurants in town who believe in what, me and others are doing to get behind it, to just increase visibility and increase consumers' exposure to these varieties. So it's just going to take time and energy. But I also can't help but think that if once I have a few years of this place under my belt, being able to sit down with, a cash flow analysis of the farming expenses and what my yields are with a farmer and have them compare it to what their per acre cost is for farming Chard or Pinot or whatever variety, they're pretty quickly going to get on board. I will put in, excluding my labor because, that's not real and it's free given the nature of my business. But just in terms of my inputs, and then, this picking crew that I hire, I will spend maybe $450 an acre here. Versus if I were to be farming vinifera, again, excluding my cost per acre, if I was really scrappy, maybe $2,500 an acre. If I was really scrappy, probably closer to $5,000 if I'm farming organically and have a crew coming in to do all of the, necessary handwork. I mean, it's only a matter of time before people are like, yeah, you know what, let's try that. I think that sounds like a good idea. So, yeah.
All right, last question for you. You mentioned your harvest tattoos, and you talked about one in particular. Tell us a bit more about some of your ink.
Oh, there's lots of weird shit. I have a pretty crass. It's gotten better as I've, aged and had myself humbled at various points in my life and been kicked while I'm down a few times. So my crassness has tempered, but used to be way worse. So I have, reverse foie gras. I have the Virgin Mary holding a stick of butter here, a pig over my heart. Did I mention I'm Jewish? I have, actually, while I was working in Chicago, one of my chef mentors, Todd Stein, I can't remember how the hell we got on this. He's also Jewish. We were joking about how it's so funny to have a couple of pork eating Jewish chefs, And I was like, Todd, Like if I do such and such during service tonight and make it through, you have to pay for me to get a tattoo. And he's like, okay, but I get to pick what it is. I was like, yeah, sure, fuck it, why not? I'll get whatever on my body permanently. And this is where I can't remember why we landed on this, but he's like, okay, I want it to be a joke about free pork. And I was like, okay, fuck it. So I have right here, it's a kind of like a, old world, like babushka grandmother holding a leg of ham, and it in the ham, like you'd see at a butcher shop, it says free 99, FREE 0.99, and then below it says just like Bubby used to make. That's a lot of my kind of tattoos. Yeah. So again, like crass sense of humor, that's toned down, and now I just have art on me. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of shtick. I have been fortunate to travel quite a bit for wine. It's like while I was in France, there's a couple of kind of like Instagram famous tattooers. So I made it a point. One was in Strasbourg and the other was in Lyon. And I contacted them on a whim, and they both just happened to have availability. So I had my whole back got tattooed while I was in France. I do not recommend ever traveling by yourself and getting tattooed on your back. The flight home was horrible. I think I just slept like this the entire time. Yeah. But I mean, a lot of it is pretty shticky. Some of it has deeper meaning. Like when I decided that just like the idea of the word Amiti kind of resonated with me. This was well before I established the brand or even kind of had any sort of real notion of running with that. I had that tattooed here. When I was very little, I have lamb tattooed across my knuckles. They're like, oh, child of God. It's like, no. When I was really little, my safety blanket was a lamb's pelt. So this is kind of my way of having my safety blanket with me. So there, there's some like nice kind of cute, deeper meaning to some, but a lot of it is either I really liked the artist and the art, or this is kind of like a weird, semi-inappropriate joke that I thought I would have imprinted on me. Yeah.
I think that sums up this interview pretty well, honestly.
Excellent.
Perfectly honest.
Perfect.
That's all the questions I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover you wanted to talk about today?
No, I don't. I mean, yeah, the only thing I would add that I hope comes across in the interview is try to sit down and engage with someone you don't know and see what they have to say. I think we could use more of that. And if it's done through wine, great. If it's done through music, food, whatever. Try to have a conversation with somebody that you wouldn't have otherwise had.
Like that. It's good. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate you sharing your story with us. Sharing this beautiful space. We managed to stay dry today.
Yeah.
Mostly. Thankfully.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Yeah, of course.
We'll let you off.
Thank you all so much. Hope it was fun.